The black blood on Thalia's hands wasn't hers. It belonged to the monster chained to the arena floor. "You're a fool to touch him, healer," the High Warden sneered. He cracked his silver whip against the iron bars. "He's not a man anymore. He's a plague." Thalia ignored the stinging pain in her knees against the rough stone. She didn't look at the warden. She looked at him, Vorian, the Abyssal King. Black veins spiderwebbed across his pale, muscled chest, pulsing with lethal venom. The poison was meant to kill him. It was meant to be the end of his reign. But if his heart stopped right now, the magical backlash of the poison would incinerate the entire pit. She would die with him. When his crimson eyes snapped open, pinning her in place, Thalia stopped breathing. She didn't see a dying king. She saw a predator. He ripped his massive arms forward. The titanium chains groaned, buckling under an impossible strength. "Get her out of there," the warden shouted. "Kill him." "No," Thalia yelled, placing her scarred hands directly over Vorian's heart. Vorian's chest heaved. A low, terrifying growl rattled the very foundation of the blood pit. He ignored the guards rushing into the cell, his burning gaze locked solely on Thalia. He inhaled sharply, tasting her scent in the stale air. The beast inside him shattered its cage. "Mine," his voice was gravel and dark magic. "Shoot him." The iron chain snapped like dry twigs. Vorian surged upward, lethal and entirely unleashed. The slaughter was about to begin, but his only focus was the fragile human trembling before him. Chapter 1. The chaos erupted instantly. "Pull her back," a guard bellowed. Two armored men grabbed Thalia's shoulders. They yanked her backward. Her fingers slipped from Vorian's skin. The connection broke. Thalia hit the stone floor hard. "Don't. If I stop drawing the poison, he'll detonate." "Let him explode," the High Warden commanded from his safe balcony. "Shields up." They didn't understand. Thalia was a soul stitcher. She didn't just heal physical wounds. She wove broken magic back together. The dark blood poison inside the Abyssal King wasn't just killing him. It was turning his magical core into a bomb. If he died, every living soul in this arena would be vaporized. "I said stay back." Thalia scrambled to her feet. She lunged forward, shoving the guards aside. She threw herself over Vorian's chest. Her hands slammed back onto his skin. Dark energy surged from his veins into hers. Her jagged scars burned like fire. She pulled. She ripped the sickness out, filtering it through her own corrupted magic. Vorian's body convulsed. The black veins receded. The explosive pressure in the room vanished. Silence fell over the pit. "Is he dead?" the warden called out. Thalia gasped for air, collapsing onto her hands. She was trembling, drenched in cold sweat. No. Then the floor shook. Vorian moved faster than human eyes could track. He didn't just stand up. He erupted. A shockwave of pure dark energy blasted outward. The closest guards were thrown backward. The impact echoed loudly as they slammed into the stone walls. Bodies dropped instantly. No blood, just the brutal display of absolute power. Thalia froze. Vorian towered over her. He grabbed her throat. She choked, her feet leaving the ground. His fingers were cold, large enough to snap her neck with a single twitch. "Who sent you?" he snarled. His voice vibrated against her skin. "I saved you," she choked out, clawing at his iron grip. He didn't listen. His crimson eyes were hollow, consumed by a beastly rage. He prepared to crush her windpipe. But then he stopped. His nostrils flared. He leaned in close. His face brushed hers, his nose trailing along her jawline. He inhaled sharply. A violent shudder ripped through his massive frame. The feral madness in his eyes flickered, replaced by an overwhelming, suffocating focus. His grip on her throat vanished. Instead, his hand dropped to her waist, crushing her flush against his solid chest. Mate. The word was a primal roar. A violent jolt of electricity shot down Thalia's spine. Her breath hitched, trapped in her lungs as a terrifying, undeniable magnetic pull anchored her soul to his. It felt like falling and burning all at once. She snapped out of it, her survival instinct kicking in. "You don't get to claim me just because I saved your life," she shoved against his chest. It was like pushing a mountain. He didn't yield an inch. Never. "Fire!" the warden screamed. Blue magic bolts lit up the dim cavern. Vorian spun, shielding Thalia completely with his own body. The spells crashed into his broad back. He didn't even flinch. "You dare touch what is mine," Vorian's voice boomed. The shadows on the floor surged upward. They slithered around the guards' legs, dragging them down. Panic replaced their bravado. Weapons clattered to the floor. "Open the gate!" the warden panicked, running for the exit. Vorian sneered. "I make my own doors." He raised his free hand. He didn't chant. He didn't use a spell book. He just clenched his fist. The air tore open. A vortex of swirling black mist and violent red lightning materialized in the center of the pit, an abyssal portal. Thalia's eyes widened in sheer terror. "No, you can't take me there." "You are coming with me." "I am not your prisoner," she screamed, thrashing in his iron grip. "You are my mate," he corrected, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And my kingdom needs its queen. I cure you. I go free. That was the deal." "You made a deal with them." Vorian glanced at the screaming guards. He looked back down at her, his eyes glowing with dark, absolute possession. "I make no deals. You don't belong to them anymore, healer. You belong to me." Before Thalia could fight back, Vorian stepped into the void, dragging her with him. The transition was brutal. Thalia's stomach lurched as they slammed onto hard, freezing ground. The portal snapped shut behind them. The air here was thin, biting, and smelled of ash. She scrambled away from him, gasping for breath. They were in a wasteland. Jagged black rocks pierced a blood-red sky, a dead landscape, the abyssal wastes. "Stay close," Vorian commanded. He swayed slightly, gripping his side. The poison was gone, but the toll on his body was heavy. He was running on pure adrenaline and dark magic. "You kidnapped me," Thalia yelled, standing up. "I saved you. From the people paying me. From the people who were going to execute you the moment I died," he corrected coldly. He took a step toward her. Thalia backed away. "Stay back." She raised her hands instinctively, taking a weak defensive stance. That was when she saw it, her right palm, where she had pressed against his chest to draw the poison. The faded, jagged scars she had carried for years were gone. Instead, black, ink-like veins pulsed under her skin. They weren't random lines. They were weaving together, forming a shape, a dark crown. She stared at it in horror. The veins pulsed in a steady, heavy rhythm. Thump, thump. She looked at Vorian. His broad chest rose and fell. Thump, thump. Her hand was beating. It was beating in the exact same rhythm as his heart. "What did you do to me?" she whispered. Vorian looked at her hand. His glowing eyes darkened with a terrifying possessiveness. "I didn't do it," he said softly. "The bond did." Chapter 2. The abyssal wastes offered no mercy. The wind howled, slicing through Thalia's thin healer tunic like invisible blades of ice. She stumbled, her vision blurring for a fraction of a second. If she collapsed here, nothing in this wasteland would leave her body intact. Vorian walked ahead of her. His massive shoulders were tense, his breathing slightly shallow. The dark blood poison was gone, but ripping a hole through dimensions took a massive toll. Still, he moved with the lethal grace of an apex predator patrolling his territory. He stopped abruptly. Without turning around, he reached back and caught her wrist. He yanked her forward. Thalia collided with his solid, scorching back. The heat radiating from his skin was overwhelming, a stark contrast to the freezing wasteland. "What are you doing?" she snapped, trying to pull away. He spun around, trapping her between his massive body and a jagged black boulder. He ripped off his heavy, dark velvet cloak and threw it over her shoulders. It swallowed her entirely, smelling of crushed pine, ozone, and a dangerous, intoxicating musk. "I'm fine, back up," she demanded. Vorian didn't move. He leaned in, his imposing frame blocking the biting wind completely. "You don't get to freeze to death while you're bound to me," he rumbled, his voice dark and absolute. "Your body answers to me now." Thalia tilted her chin up, refusing to cower. "You know exactly what you are to me," he whispered, his crimson eyes dropping to her lips. "That doesn't mean I belong to you," she shot back, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Your mouth lies." He leaned closer. "But your pulse doesn't." The air between them grew dangerously heavy. He tilted his head, his face hovering mere millimeters from hers. She could feel his hot breath ghosting over her skin. The tension pulled taut, a magnetic force demanding that last fraction of an inch be closed. His gaze darkened, filled with a primal, starving craving. He was going to kiss her. A loud meow echoed in the dead wasteland. Vorian froze, his pupils dilated, turning completely black. The intoxicating tension vanished, instantly replaced by pure murderous intent. He looked down at her leather satchel. A bald, wrinkly gray head popped out. Garrick, a hairless sphinx cat with oversized yellow eyes. Vorian moved so fast it was a blur. His large hand shot out, grabbing Garrick by the scruff of his neck and hauling him into the air. The cat dangled helplessly. "A spy," Vorian snarled, his other hand igniting with dark fire. "I will incinerate it." "No," Thalia screamed, lunging forward and grabbing Vorian's wrist. "He's my pet. Drop him." "It reeks of old magic," Vorian growled. "It doesn't belong near you." "Put me down, you oversized brute." Vorian blinked. The dark fire in his hand flickered. Thalia stared. "Garrick, did you just talk?" The hairless cat rolled his yellow eyes. "Yes, Thalia, I talk. I've been talking for 5 years. You just thought I was coughing up hairballs. Now, tell your terrifying boyfriend to unhand me before I vomit on his boots." Vorian tightened his grip. "Give me one reason not to crush your skull, beast." "Because I know where the caves are," Garrick yelled, his little paws flailing. "A red ash storm is coming. You're powerful, Your Majesty, but right now you look like you're going to pass out. I can guide you." Vorian's jaw clenched. With a scoff of pure disgust, he dropped Garrick onto the frozen dirt. "Lead the way," Vorian commanded. "If you try to run, I will skin you and wear you as a glove." They moved quickly as the sky darkened into a bruised purple. Ash began to fall like toxic snow. Vorian stayed agonizingly close to Thalia. His hand rested firmly on the small of her back, a constant possessive weight. They reached the mouth of a massive cavern just as the storm broke. "Inside," Garrick ordered, dashing into the darkness. Thalia stepped forward, but Vorian suddenly grabbed her waist and hurled her backward. "Quiet," he ordered, his broad back blocking the entrance. Glowing red eyes appeared in the dark ash. 12 hellhounds. They were the size of horses, bodies made of twisted black muscle and smoking embers. "Run into the tunnel, Thalia," Vorian ordered. He didn't look back. He just cracked his knuckles. "I'm not leaving you," she yelled, That wasn't a request. Move. The alpha hound lunged. Vorian met it midair, slamming it into the ground and snapping its neck. But there were too many. 3 hounds pinned him at once. Vorian roared, blasting 2 away with dark magic, but his energy flickered. The 3rd hound sank its burning fangs directly into Vorian's shoulder. Black blood sprayed. Vorian dropped to one knee, a guttural sound of agony ripping from his throat. "Vorian," Thalia screamed. She didn't run. Her soul-stitcher instincts overrode her fear. She grabbed a jagged piece of obsidian and sprinted toward him. Vorian threw the hound off. He looked up, his crimson eyes widening in panic. "Thalia, stay back." She slid onto her knees beside him. She dragged the obsidian blade across her own palm, right over the pulsing black crown mark. Crimson blood welled up, glowing with a faint, ethereal silver light. "What are you doing?" he choked out. "Saving you. Again." She grabbed the back of his neck, pulling his face down, and pressed her bleeding palm directly against his lips. "Drink," she commanded. Vorian tried to resist, but the scent of her blood hit him. His fangs extended. He clamped his mouth over her hand, drinking deeply. A shock wave of pure power erupted from his core. His grip tightened instinctively around her waist, pulling her flush against him as if letting go would kill him. It was a terrifying, absolute surrender to the bond. The wound on his shoulder stitched itself together. He ripped his mouth from her hand, his eyes igniting with absolute dominance. The remaining hellhounds weren't growling anymore. They were whimpering. "Mine," Vorian whispered against her skin. Then he stood up to finish the slaughter. Thalia sat on the cold ground, her chest heaving. Beside her, Garrick peeked out from behind a rock. He stared at Thalia's glowing blood on the dirt, his yellow eyes wide with absolute dread. "By the abyss," Garrick muttered under his breath, barely a whisper. "I didn't think that bloodline would wake up so soon." Thalia's breath caught. The adrenaline turned to ice. She snapped her head toward the cat. "What did you just say?" Chapter 3. "What did you just say?" Thalia demanded, stepping toward the hairless cat. Garrick's yellow eyes darted frantically toward the cavern entrance. He pressed his belly flat to the stone. "Nothing. A slip of the tongue. The ash is messing with my brain." A heavy, suffocating silence dropped over the wasteland. The slaughter was over. Vorian walked out of the ash storm, wiping black, smoking blood from his jaw. The wound on his shoulder was fully sealed. Thalia's blood had done more than heal him. It had violently supercharged his dark core. The air around him crackled with lethal, unstable energy. He didn't spare the cat a single glance. His glowing crimson eyes were locked entirely on Thalia. He crossed the distance between them in 3 massive strides. Without a word, he grabbed her by the waist and hoisted her off the frozen dirt. "Put me down." "We are exposed here," he growled, carrying her deeper into the pitch-black maw of the cavern. Garrick scrambled after them, keeping a very safe distance. Inside the deep belly of the cave, the wind vanished. Vorian snapped his fingers. A cluster of black-violet flames ignited along the damp stone walls, casting long, dancing shadows. He finally set her down on a flat rock. But he didn't step back. He stood dangerously close, his chest rising and falling heavily. Thalia reached for the hem of her tunic, ripping a clean strip of fabric. She stepped right back into his space. "Sit down. There's still hellhound venom on your skin." Vorian caught her wrists before she could touch his chest. His grip was tight, trembling slightly. "Don't," he warned, his voice a dangerous, gravelly rasp. "Step away from me, healer. Don't treat me like glass when I just fed you my blood," she shot back, refusing to break eye contact. "Sit." Vorian's jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek, but slowly he lowered himself onto a boulder. He was still taller than her even while sitting. Thalia carefully wiped the toxic sludge from his collarbone. Every time her fingers brushed his bare skin, a violent shudder ripped through his massive frame. He was fighting a war inside his own head. "You shouldn't have done it," he whispered. The terrifying Abyssal King sounded dangerously close to losing his mind. "You gave me your blood. You fed the bond." "I kept you alive," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. Vorian stood up abruptly, knocking her hands away. The sudden movement forced Thalia to take a step back. "It was a mistake," he roared, the sound vibrating off the cave walls. His eyes bled from crimson to pitch black. "You don't understand what this magic is. You don't know what it demands." "Then tell me," Thalia yelled back, refusing to cower. "You dragged me into this hell. Tell me what it wants." "It wants you." The words hit the air like a physical blow. He stepped into her space, backing her up against the cold stone wall. He placed a massive hand on the rock right beside her head, caging her completely. The scent of ozone, blood, and pure male dominance swallowed her whole. "I didn't choose this bond," he breathed, his face inches from hers, his control snapping by the second. "But now that I have tasted you, I will slaughter realms before I let anyone else touch you." Thalia's breath hitched. "Vorian." "I could break you," he confessed, staring at her lips with a starving, desperate craving. "I am a monster, Thalia. I destroy everything I touch." Thalia looked up into his black eyes. She didn't pull away. Instead, she reached up, her scarred hands resting flat against his broad, burning chest. "Then destroy me," she dared him. That was the breaking point. A feral groan ripped from his throat. Vorian's hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back, and he crashed his mouth down on hers. It wasn't a kiss. It was an absolute possession. His lips were hard, demanding, devouring her defiance. His arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her flush against his solid body. He held her so tightly, it felt as if letting go would kill him. Thalia's mind short-circuited. A jolt of pure, white-hot fire shot down her spine. Her hands curled into his tunic, pulling him closer, anchoring herself to the storm. He tasted like dark magic and raw power. He groaned again, the sound vibrating against her lips. The beast inside him clawed its way to the surface, driven by an ancient primal need to bind her to him completely. His mouth left her lips, trailing hot, desperate kisses down her jaw. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent. "Mine," he rasped against her skin. "Only mine." His fangs extended. He couldn't stop it. The mating instinct overrode his humanity. He bit down hard on her collarbone. Thalia gasped, her spine arching. It was a sharp, piercing pain, immediately followed by a terrifying rush of euphoria. But the euphoria didn't last. The moment his fangs pierced her skin, the black crown on her right hand ignited. It didn't just glow. It burst into searing, blinding white light. Thalia screamed. The cavern walls dissolved. She was falling through an abyss of red lightning and shadows. She crashed onto a cold marble floor. She wasn't in her body anymore. She was inside a memory, his memory, a throne room made of blackened bone. She saw Vorian, centuries younger, kneeling on the floor. His chest was torn completely open, black blood pooling around him. Standing over him was a man with identical features, but eyes filled with cold, calculating betrayal. Malachor. "For the good of the realm, brother," the man sneered. He plunged a silver runic sword directly into Vorian's heart. A shock wave of agony tore through Thalia's own chest. She felt Vorian's soul fracture. She felt half of his humanity being violently ripped away and cast into the void. "The curse is set," a disembodied ancient voice echoed in the vision. "When the severed soul finds its vessel, she will be the anchor. If the king does not reclaim his throne, the vessel will burn away to ash." Thalia violently gasped for air, snapping back to reality. She was back in the cave, sliding down the wall, shaking uncontrollably. The blinding light from her hand faded back into the dark ink of the crown tattoo. Vorian had ripped himself away from her. He was standing on the other side of the cave, his chest heaving, his face pale with absolute horror. He stared at the bleeding bite mark on her collarbone, then at her terrified eyes. He knew. "You saw it," he whispered, his voice sounding completely shattered. Thalia clutched her bleeding chest, her mind reeling from the revelation. The mark wasn't just a mating bond. It was a death sentence. Chapter 4. The music inside the Court of Sins throbbed like a dying heartbeat. The air was thick with the scent of heavy perfume, blood wine, and predatory lust. Demons of high nobility danced under floating chandeliers of dark crystal. Thalia kept her eyes on the polished marble floor. She was dressed in sheer dark silk that clung to her curves, a gilded collar around her neck. A thin silver chain connected the collar to the massive cloaked figure walking right behind her. Vorian. He was disguised as a smuggler, his face hidden beneath a heavy hood. But the disguise wasn't working. The lethal, suffocating aura radiating from his body was making the nearby nobles instinctively step back. He gripped the silver chain so tightly his knuckles were white. "If one more of them looks at you," Vorian's voice vibrated through the bond directly into her mind, dark and lethal, "I am going to burn this palace to ash." "Don't," Thalia whispered back, leaning slightly into his imposing frame. "We need the High Chancellor's cipher to break the death sentence. Just keep your head down." "I am the king. I do not bow to these parasites." "You do tonight," she snapped softly, "or we both die." They stopped near a velvet-draped pillar. Vorian pulled her flush against his side, tucking her under his cloak. His hand rested heavily on her waist, a constant burning brand of possession. He wasn't just hiding her, he was hoarding her. "Well, well, what an exquisite little morsel." The arrogant voice cut through the music. A demon duke, dripping in jewels and smelling of rotting roses, blocked their path. His reptilian yellow eyes raked over Thalia's body with blatant, sickening hunger. Vorian's chest rumbled with a suppressed growl. The silver chain in his hand snapped into two pieces. Thalia's heart pounded. She stepped in front of Vorian, trying to block the duke's view. "We are not looking for a patron, my lord." "I wasn't asking the pet," the duke sneered. He took a step closer, completely ignoring the towering cloaked figure behind her. Before Thalia could back away, the duke reached out. His cold, clawed finger traced her collarbone, brushing directly against the fresh, healing bite mark. Vorian had left. The temperature in the room instantly dropped to freezing. Vorian didn't just step forward. He materialized. He ripped his hood back. His crimson eyes were entirely eclipsed by pitch black. The shadows in the grand hall violently surged upward, shattering the crystal chandeliers. Glass rained down. The music abruptly stopped. The duke gasped, finally recognizing the face of the monster standing before him. The Abyssal King. The king everyone thought was dead. "Name your price," the Duke stammered, terrified but trying to save face in front of the silent, watching court. He hastily pulled a heavy bag of gold coins from his belt and tossed it. It hit Vorian's broad chest and scattered across the floor. I will buy the human. You have exactly 3 seconds to remove your hand from her, Vorian said. His voice wasn't a yell. It was a terrifying, absolute promise of death. Your Majesty, I didn't know. Vorian didn't wait for 3. He grabbed the Duke by the throat, lifting him off the floor with a single hand. Dark, volatile magic erupted from Vorian's grip. A sickening crack echoed through the dead, silent hall. The Duke's eyes rolled back. Vorian dropped him. The lifeless body slammed onto the marble, completely broken. No one breathed. Hundreds of demons froze in absolute terror. Vorian didn't look at the corpse. He turned to Thalia. He grabbed the gilded collar around her neck and ripped it off with his bare hands, throwing the ruined metal away. He pulled her fiercely against his chest, wrapping his arms around her, as if shielding her from the entire world. He turned his burning black-eyed glare to the terrified crowd. She is my queen, Vorian roared, his voice shaking the very foundation of the palace. Anyone who looks at her, anyone who breathes her name, will die. Thalia clutched his tunic, her heart soaring and breaking at the same time. It was a reckless, beautiful, catastrophic claim. Kill the impostor, the battle cry ripped from the balconies. The grand doors of the hall blasted open. Hundreds of heavily armored royal guards poured into the room. They weren't regular soldiers. They wore the silver and black crest of the usurper, Malakor's elite forces. Vorian, look out, Thalia screamed. A massive blast of blue siege magic struck the pillar beside them. The explosion was deafening. Debris and dust filled the air, blinding them both. Vorian wrapped his body around hers, taking the brunt of the flying stone. But the magic wasn't meant to kill them. It was meant to divide them. The marble floor beneath Thalia's feet glowed with a violent red rune, a trap. The stone suddenly shattered. The floor gave way entirely. Thalia! Vorian lunged, his hand extending desperately through the falling debris. Their fingers brushed. For an agonizing split second, their eyes met. His were filled with pure, unfiltered terror. Then she fell into the darkness below, his desperate roar echoing as the world above her collapsed. Chapter 5. Thalia didn't hit the ground. Before the darkness could swallow her, a massive arm wrapped around her waist, yanking her flush against a solid chest. Vorian had dove into the collapsing pit right after her. Black mist exploded beneath them, cushioning their violent descent. They crashed into the lower catacombs of the palace, the impact rattling Thalia's bones. "Are you hurt?" Vorian demanded, his hands frantically checking her face, her shoulders. His eyes were wide, the arrogant king replaced by a terrified man. "I'm fine," she gasped, clinging to his torn tunic. "Vorian, the guards, they don't matter." He pulled her to her feet, his eyes glowing with lethal determination. "The throne room is at the end of this hall. Once I touch the black bone throne, my full power returns. The curse on you will break." They ran. The catacombs were dead silent. No guards, no alarms, just the heavy echo of their boots against the damp stone. Vorian kicked the massive obsidian doors of the throne room open. They shattered inward. The grand chamber was empty. At the center of the dais, the black bone throne waited, radiating an ancient, suffocating aura. Thalia's breath hitched. They had made it. Vorian didn't hesitate. He strode up the dais, pulling Thalia with him. He placed his scarred hand on the jagged armrest of the throne. The entire palace violently shuddered, A shockwave of pure, unadulterated dark magic blasted outward, washing over Vorian. The shadows in the room bowed to him. The king had returned. Thalia looked down at her hand. The pulsing black ink of the crown tattoo stopped beating. The searing pain in her chest vanished. The mark didn't disappear, but it faded into a dull, dormant gray. "It stopped," she whispered, tears of relief pricking her eyes. She looked up at him. "Vorian, it stopped." Vorian let out a ragged breath. The tension completely drained from his massive shoulders. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. It was a fiercely protective, desperate embrace. "It's over," he murmured against her temple. "You're safe. I've got you." Clang. A heavy metallic sound echoed through the chamber. Thalia didn't even have time to blink before a glowing, venomous green grid slammed down from the ceiling, caging them completely inside the throne dais. Vorian roared, hurling a blast of dark magic at the bars. The magic fizzled instantly. "Anti-magic," Vorian snarled, shoving Thalia behind him. His body tensed, instantly reverting to a lethal shield. Slow, mocking applause echoed from the shadows behind the throne. "A truly touching reunion, brother. I almost shed a tear." Malachor stepped into the light. He looked exactly like Vorian, but his armor was pristine silver, and his eyes were cold, calculating gold. There was no madness in him, only ruthless ambition. "Malachor," Vorian growled, his voice vibrating with absolute hatred. "Let her go. Your war is with me." "My war is for the Abyss," Malachor corrected smoothly, stepping down the stairs. "You were destroying it, Vorian. Your power was too volatile. You were a plague. So you stabbed me in the back." "I did what had to be done to save our kingdom," Malachor snapped, his composure slipping for a fraction of a second. He took a deep breath, adjusting his silver cuffs. "But you are impossibly stubborn. Even with half your soul severed, you survived." Thalia froze. Half his soul. "You didn't just steal my throne," Vorian's jaw clenched. "You mutilated my core." "I sent the dark half of your soul to the human realm," Malachor said coldly, hoping it would dissipate, hoping it would die. But it didn't. It found a host. Malachor snapped his fingers. "Come out, old friend, you've done well." From the shadows beside Malachor, a small familiar figure trotted out. Garrick, the hairless sphinx cat. Thalia stepped out from behind Vorian, her heart dropping into her stomach. "Garrick?" The cat didn't look at her. Instead, its bones began to crack. The small body twisted, expanding violently. The gray skin turned to hardened obsidian stone. Leather wings ripped from its back. Within seconds, Garrick wasn't a cat anymore. He was a towering, heavily armored gargoyle, wearing the crest of Malachor's elite guard. "I am sorry, Thalia," Garrick's voice was deep, devoid of its usual sarcasm. "I was assigned to watch the vessel. 20 years of eating dry kibble, waiting for the magic to wake up." "You lied to me," Thalia's voice cracked. The betrayal felt like a physical knife twisting in her ribs. "You were my only friend, my pet." "You are not a person healer," Garrick said, his yellow eyes hardened. "You are a vault, and you hold something that doesn't belong to you." "Enough talking," Vorian interrupted, his fists trembling with suppressed rage. He glared at Malachor. "Drop the cage, coward. Face me," Malachor chuckled. "Face you? Why would I do that, brother, when you are about to defeat yourself?" Malachor drew a silver runic sword from his hip. It was the exact same sword from the vision, the sword that had killed Vorian centuries ago. Malachor tossed it through the bars of the energy cage. The sword clattered onto the floor, sliding to a stop right at Vorian's boots. "What is this?" Vorian sneered, and Tichai, the Ash Prophecy, Malachor said, his golden eyes completely devoid of mercy. The king and the vessel cannot coexist. The mark on her hand didn't stop because you touched the throne, Vorian. It stopped because it is preparing to detonate. Thalia looked at her hand. The faded gray ink was beginning to glow red from the inside out. It was burning again. She is the lock, Malachor pointed at Thalia. Your severed soul is the key inside her. If you do not reclaim it, the mark will explode. It will vaporize her, you, and the rest of this palace. Vorian didn't look at the sword. He looked at Thalia. His crimson eyes were filled with an absolute shattering horror. There is only one way to break the bond, brother, Malachor said softly. The ultimate, cruelest twist of the knife. Pick up the sword, Vorian, plunge it into her heart. Reclaim your soul. Save our kingdom. Malachor crossed his arms, a victorious smirk playing on his lips. If you don't, the mark detonates. She dies anyway, and takes the rest of your magic with her. Choose, my king. The realm or the girl. Chapter 6. The red glow from Thalia's hand illuminated the dark marble floor. It felt like holding a dying star. The heat was unbearable, traveling up her veins, straight toward her heart. The sword lay between them, humming with ancient lethal silver magic. Pick it up, Vorian, Malachor mocked, leaning casually against the anti-magic bars. The clock is ticking. Be the king you were born to be. Thalia looked at the sword. Then she looked up at Vorian. His massive frame was completely rigid. His crimson eyes stared at the blade with absolute dread. For the first time since she had met him, the terrifying Abyssal King looked entirely helpless. Thalia took a shaky breath. She took a step forward, putting herself directly in front of him. Do it, she whispered. Vorian's eyes snapped to hers. No. Vorian, if the mark detonates, we both die. Thousands of people above us will die. She reached out, her scarred fingers gently resting on his broad, trembling chest. You have a kingdom to save. Damn the kingdom, he snarled, his voice breaking. He grabbed her hand, pulling her against him. I don't care about the throne. I don't care about them. I only care about you. You don't have a choice, Malachor yelled from outside the cage, his patience fracturing. The magic is reaching critical mass. He was right. The air inside the cage began to warp and distort. A high-pitched whining sound filled the room. The explosion was seconds away. Vorian closed his eyes. A tear of black blood slipped down his cheek. I am sorry, my little healer, he whispered against her forehead. He let go of her and bent down, his large hand wrapped around the hilt of the silver sword. Malachor smiled in victory. Thalia closed her eyes, exposing her chest. She didn't flinch. She accepted it. But the strike never came. Instead of raising the blade, Vorian flipped it horizontally. He gripped the lethal, cursed silver directly by the razor-sharp edge with both of his bare hands. Malachor's smile vanished. What are you doing? Stop! Vorian looked at his brother, his eyes burning with absolute devastating hatred. I am the king of the abyss, he roared, and I make my own choices. With a terrifying surge of brute strength, Vorian snapped the runic sword in half. The magical backlash was catastrophic. The sword didn't just break, it detonated. Because Vorian was holding it, his body acted as a lightning rod. He absorbed the entire blast of the cursed silver and volatile dark magic. A blinding flash of blue and black light engulfed the cage. Vorian, Thalia screamed. The shockwave knocked her backward. When she opened her eyes, the sword was reduced to smoking dust, and Vorian was on the floor, His body was completely limp. The dark veins on his neck were turning an ashen, lifeless gray. He had absorbed a curse meant to destroy a soul, just to spare hers. No, 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 Thalia scrambled toward him, dropping to her knees. She grabbed his face. His skin was ice cold. Vorian, look at me. Open your eyes. He didn't move. His chest was still. Outside the cage, Malachor stared in sheer disbelief. He destroyed his own core to save a human, the fool. Shut up, Thalia shrieked, her voice tearing. She slammed her hands onto Vorian's chest. She called upon her soul stitcher magic, but there was nothing left to heal. His physical body was intact, but his internal magic core was completely shattered. He was dying, unless she gave him what belonged to him. Thalia looked at the glowing red crown on her hand, the half of his soul. If I give it back, there will be nothing left to keep my human heart beating, her mind whispered. She didn't hesitate. I don't accept your sacrifice, Thalia cried fiercely. She leaned down and crashed her lips against his cold, unmoving mouth. She didn't use her magic to heal. She used the forbidden art, the reverse stitch. She opened the vault of her own soul and pushed everything she had, her life force, her humanity, and the severed half of his abyssal soul, directly into his empty core. The pain was unimaginable. It felt like being burned alive from the inside out. But she held on, kissing him deeper, pouring every ounce of her existence into the monster she had fallen in love with. A pulse of pure, blinding white light erupted from their connected lips. Thalia gasped, breaking the kiss. Her vision instantly faded to black. Her body lost all strength, slipping sideways off his chest. Silence slammed back into the room. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, the throne room trembled. Not a tremor, an earthquake. The anti-magic grid surrounding them shattered like cheap glass, exploding outward. Malachor threw his arms up to shield his face, stumbling backward in absolute terror. The gargoyle, Garrick, dropped to his knees. His heavy head bowed to the floor. From the center of the broken cage, a shadow rose. Vorian stood up. He was no longer just a king. He was a god of ruin. His crimson eyes were gone. They were entirely, endlessly black, bleeding thick shadows into the air. The power radiating from him was so oppressive that the marble floor around his boots spiderwebbed into dust. He was whole. Brother, Malachor choked out, dropping his broken sword, taking a terrified step back. You survived. Vorian didn't even look at Malachor. With a flick of his wrist, an invisible force slammed into Malachor's chest, launching the usurper across the room. Malachor crashed into a stone pillar, slumping to the floor, completely paralyzed by the overwhelming pressure of Vorian's aura. Vorian turned around, his dark, majestic face softening instantly as he looked down at the floor. Thalia. He knelt beside her. You did it, little healer. The curse is broken. He reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. His fingers brushed her cheek. Vorian froze. Her skin was cold, completely, utterly cold. The black crown on her hand was gone, but so was her pulse. Her chest was completely still. Thalia? Vorian's voice was a fragile, terrified whisper. The abyssal power swirling around him violently flickered, crashing down like a dying sun. No, wake up. He pulled her limp body into his arms, crushing her against his chest. Wake up. I command you to wake up. Nothing. The king of the abyss let out a roar of absolute world-ending agony. It wasn't the roar of a monster. It was the scream of a broken man. The Blood Moon Lake, Garrick's voice cut through the despair. The gargoyle scrambled forward, pointing desperately toward the catacombs. Her body is completely empty, your majesty, but her soul is a Stitcher's. It lingers for a few minutes before crossing over. Take her to the Blood Moon Lake, now. If you share your immortality, you can anchor her back. Vorian didn't ask questions. His eyes ignited with a desperate, terrifying fire. He gathered Thalia securely against his chest, stood up, and tore a hole straight through the fabric of space and time. Chapter 7. The portal violently spat them out. Vorian didn't hesitate. Holding Thalia's lifeless body tight against his chest, he plunged straight into the Blood Moon Lake. The crimson water swallowed them. It was thick, glowing with ancient primal magic. They sank toward the bottom, the silence of the deep deafening. Vorian didn't need to breathe, but panic was clawing its way up his throat. He looked at Thalia. Her pale face was perfectly still. Her hair floated around her like a dark halo. He had his soul back, but he was entirely empty. Share your immortality. Vorian didn't use a blade. He didn't need to. He slammed his right hand over his own heart. His eyes flared with absolute terrifying power. He forcefully extracted a fraction of his own core. A glowing, concentrated sphere of pure, immortal abyssal blood. He didn't care if it weakened him. He didn't care if it destroyed him. He pressed his glowing palm directly over Thalia's heart, forcefully pushing his immortal essence into her cold chest. Take it, his voice vibrated through the water, a desperate mental roar. Take my eternity. Come back to me. For a grueling, agonizing moment, nothing happened. The glowing essence faded into her skin. Vorian's face crumpled. The god of ruin pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck, ready to let the lake drown him too. Then he felt it, thump, a single incredibly strong heartbeat against his chest. Vorian's head snapped up, Thalia's back arched. The water around them violently churned, erupting with a blinding mixture of dark shadows and silver light. Her eyes snapped open. They weren't the soft brown of a human healer anymore. They were a brilliant, glowing wine red. The eyes of a half-demon, the eyes of a queen. Vorian surged upward, breaking the surface of the lake. They crashed onto the shallow crimson shores. Thalia gasped, taking her first jagged breath of immortal air. She coughed, clutching her chest, her heart hammering with a terrifying new rhythm. She looked at her hands. The scars were gone. The black veins were gone. She felt entirely, overwhelmingly powerful. She looked up. Vorian, the supreme ruler of the abyss, the most lethal creature in existence, wasn't standing over her. He was on his knees in the shallow water. His massive shoulders shook. He didn't look like a conqueror. He looked like a man who had just survived the end of the world. He crawled forward, ignoring the wet sand staining his dark pants. He stopped right in front of her. Slowly, he reached out, his large, trembling hands gently wrapping around her waist. He pressed his face against her stomach. "Vorian?" she whispered, her voice still rough. "You died," he choked out, the sound completely shattering. "You stitched my soul back together, and you died for me." Thalia reached down, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. "I'm right here." He pulled back just enough to look at her. Black tears stained his cheeks. He took her small hands and pressed them flat against his chest, right over his violently beating heart. "I am the king of the abyss," Vorian declared, his voice thick with raw, unfiltered emotion. "I command the shadows. I hold the power to break this world." He bowed his head, kissing the inside of her wrists with agonizing devotion. "But my life, my magic, my soul, they are entirely yours. I am forever your slave, Thalia. Do whatever you want with me, just never leave me again." Thalia stared at the terrifying monster kneeling at her feet. She didn't pull away. She tilted his chin up, forcing his glowing black eyes to meet her wine-red ones. "Then command your tears to stop, my king," she said, her voice steady and echoing with new authority. "We have a realm to rule." The Court of Sins was completely silent. The grand balcony overlooked the entire abyssal capital. Below, thousands of demons and nobles had gathered, trembling in the cold wind. They weren't looking at Malachor, who was currently chained to a stone pillar, stripped of his silver armor and his pride. They were looking at the balcony. Vorian stepped out of the shadows. He wore the black crown of bone. His aura was suffocating, a heavy blanket of absolute dominance that forced every single demon to drop to their knees. But he didn't stand in the center. He stood to the side. He extended his hand. Thalia walked out into the light. She didn't wear a healer's tunic, and she certainly didn't wear a slave's collar. She was draped in midnight silk and silver armor, her wine-red eyes burning with absolute confidence. She placed her hand in Vorian's. He pulled her close, kissing her temple in front of the entire terrified kingdom. "She is the Soul Stitcher," Vorian's voice boomed, carrying across the city. "She is the anchor of my magic, and she is your queen." He didn't ask for their loyalty. He demanded it. "Bow to her," he commanded, "or burn." As one, the entire Abyssal Kingdom pressed their foreheads to the stone floor. Complete, absolute surrender. Thalia looked at the bowing masses, then up at Vorian. He gave her a feral, possessive smile. She squeezed his hand. The nightmare was over. The kingdom was theirs. But deep beneath the capital, at the very bottom of the Blood Moon Lake, the water stopped glowing. The ancient, forbidden magic Thalia had used to resurrect the king had done exactly what it was meant to do. It had rewritten the laws of death. It had shattered the natural order, and in doing so, it had broken the oldest seal in the abyss. In the pitch-black depths of the lake, a pair of ancient golden eyes slowly opened. They were the size of the palace itself. A low rumbling vibration shook the tectonic plates of the realm. The Abyssal King had reclaimed his throne, but the true nightmare of the abyss had just woken up.